When the arrogant millionaire Augusto D'Angelo laughs at the maid's son, a simple 13-year-old boy surprises everyone by translating a secret clause that no lawyer has been able to decipher, and in front of investors and directors, he transforms his humility into a truth that silences an entire room and shakes the pride of the empire. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel now to receive impactful stories that touch your heart every day. In the imposing Aurelius Corporation meeting room, the atmosphere exuded luxury and power. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting their golden glow onto the solid oak table, where lawyers and directors waited in silence. In the center, with a smile that blended sarcasm and arrogance, stood Augusto D'Angelo, the 55-year-old billionaire who ruled his business empire with an iron fist. His gray, European-cut suit seemed tailored to convey authority, and every gesture with the gold pen between his fingers showed he felt untouchable. He didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. He simply laughed. And that's exactly what he did. His laughter echoed off the elegant walls, thick with contempt, as if the mere sound were enough to diminish anyone who dared stand before him. The directors, accustomed to their boss's humiliations, tried to mask their tension with wry smiles, while the lawyers lowered their eyes, fearing they would be the next target of his mockery. Augusto, for his part, seemed to thrive on the embarrassment he spread throughout the room. He took pleasure in reminding everyone that they were merely expendable pieces on his chessboard. He spoke little, but each word was laced with venom, calculated to belittle whoever stood before him. And that morning, in particular, his mood was crueler than usual. Outside the room, the hurried footsteps of employees echoed in the hallway. But inside, time seemed suspended, trapped between the brightness of the lights and the shadow of arrogance that dominated every corner. A multi-million-dollar contract waited on the table, a document that could define the company's future and impact thousands of lives. But at that moment, what truly caught everyone's attention wasn't the contract itself, but the way Augusto treated everyone as mere spectators of his arrogance. He laughed again, louder, as if already knowing that, no matter what was written on the paper, power would always be in his hands. However, fate was preparing something that not even his fortune could control, and that laughter would soon come at a price. On the oak table lay a document that seemed to carry more weight than anyone there could bear. It was a multi-million-dollar contract with foreign investors, full of clauses that would define the future of the Aurelius Corporation for years to come. The pages, firm and sealed, reflected not only numbers, but also power, risk, and hidden secrets. As the lawyers leafed through the pages with restless hands, the directors exchanged glances filled with anticipation and fear. The room, which minutes before had seemed merely a stage for Augusto D'Angelo's laughter, now transformed into an arena of tension, where every comma could mean ruin or triumph. Then the unexpected detail emerged, a clause written in archaic legal Latin, lost among the pages, like a carefully placed trap. The lawyers frowned, passing the text from hand to hand, murmuring among themselves in search of an interpretation. None of them dared admit the error in public, but insecurity spread like wildfire. With each second of hesitation, the foreign investors' gazes grew harder, as if assessing not just the contract but the entire company's competence. The heavy silence in the room was no longer respect for Augusto, but rather fear of what those words might mean. Augusto watched the scene with almost cruel pleasure. He slowly crossed his legs, rested his gold pen on the table, and let out a sneer. For him, this confusion was yet another opportunity to reaffirm his position. The magnate knew that, regardless of what was written, His word would always prevail. And when he realized that none of the lawyers dared decipher the text aloud, he leaned back in his chair and let his laughter echo through the room. A laughter that not only mocked the expert's inability, but also set the stage for the humiliation that was to follow. The directors in the room began exchanging uneasy glances. Some shifted in their leather chairs. Others nervously shuffled the papers in front of them, as if the mere movement could disguise their discomfort. Augusto D'Angelo's laughter sounded like a hammer hitting each of their pride. None dared contradict him, but they all knew that failure to resolve this clause could cost them dearly. It was like standing before an abyss. They knew that one false move could destroy not only their reputations, but also millions in contracts and investments. The lawyers, in turn, felt like defeated soldiers before their relentless commander. Years of study were evident in every face. Expensive diplomas hung on the walls of their offices, but faced with archaic Latin, they all seemed powerless. Every attempt to translate resulted in garbled and inconsistent sentences. The foreign investors, men and women with cold gazes and impeccable attire, did not hide their disdain. One of them even crossed his arms, staring defiantly at Augusto, as if awaiting proof that the firm was truly trustworthy. Augusto noticed the nervousness spreading like a silent virus. Instead of intervening to calm things down, he leaned over the table, drumming his fingers impatiently. His smile widened, and he made a point of letting out another laugh, this time longer and crueler. That laugh not only filled the silence, but also stifled any hope that anyone could reverse the situation. It was as if he were certain that nothing and no one could break his supremacy. But just at that moment, something unexpected was about to happen, something that would transform the audience's nervousness into an unforgettable shock. Augusto D'Angelo rose slowly, imposing his presence like a king before defeated subjects. The gold pen gleamed in his hand as he walked around the table, eyeing each lawyer as if they were mere apprentices incapable of justifying their exorbitant fees. His tone, laced with irony, cut through the silence. So many diplomas, so many medals of merit, and none of you can translate a single Latin phrase. The comment fell like a sentence of collective humiliation. The directors lowered their eyes even further, and the foreign investors smiled contemptuously. With a theatrical gesture, Augusto tapped his pen against the contract and raised his eyebrows, feigning exaggerated indignation. "Imagine if I had to entrust the fate of my fortune to these incompetents," he said, letting out a laugh that echoed off the walls. Some directors forced shy laughs, trying to keep up with their boss, but the sound sounded false, uncomfortable, like a chorus of puppets tied to invisible strings. Augusto reveled in this power, the ability to transform even collective shame into a spectacle for his vanity. It was then, in a sudden movement, that he pointed his pen to the back of the room, where a discreet figure had just appeared. With a smile of pure sarcasm, he scoffed, Maybe the cleaning boy knows more than you doctors." The laughter in the room erupted again, but this time it was tinged with disbelief. Eyes turned to the door, and there stood Miguel Andrade, dressed in a simple school uniform, his worn backpack on his back, his eyes alert. The boy hadn't been called, but fate had just thrust him into the spotlight of a scene that would change everything. The meeting room doors slowly opened, revealing the small, unlikely figure of Miguel Andrade, a thin, dark-skinned, 13-year-old boy with a firm gaze. His school uniform was wrinkled from a day of classes, and a worn backpack hung over one shoulder, almost too big for him. Miguel had come here only to bring lunch to his mother, Helena Andrade, a maid at Augusto's mansion. But fate was dragging him into a scene charged with tension and arrogance. The difference between the simple boy and this luxurious environment seemed a cruel contrast, as if he had invaded a world that never belonged to him. The directors and lawyers stared at him in surprise, some even with a hint of disdain, as if Miguel's mere presence in that space were an unforgivable mistake. Augusto, however, saw the perfect opportunity to amplify the spectacle of humiliation. His eyes glinted with venomous sarcasm, and a crooked smile formed on his lips. He raised the golden pen like a sword, pointing directly at the boy. "Look who's here," he said theatrically. "Maybe the maid's son can decipher what you elite doctors can't." Laughter spread through the room, this time loud and shameless, echoing against the luxurious walls. Miguel, however, didn't look away. His dark eyes locked with Augusto's, and instead of retreating, he took a step forward, as if the weight of the entire room wasn't enough to intimidate him. The contrast was stark. On one side, the arrogance of the most powerful man there. On the other, the quiet courage of a boy carrying only a backpack and a dignity in his gaze. The laughter that had once seemed deafening faded into an uncomfortable silence. The boy, who should have been just an invisible extra, was now the center of the scene, and no one could have predicted what would happen next. Augusto D'Angelo sat up straight in his chair, his chin jutting out as if savoring the moment of turning a simple coincidence into a spectacle of humiliation. The directors, still somewhat incredulous at Miguel Andrade's presence, waited for their boss's next sarcasm. The billionaire slowly twirled the gold pen between his fingers, as if he were a maestro about to conduct his private orchestra. Then, in a tone thick with irony, he said, "So, kid, can you decipher what even my renowned lawyers can't?" The entire room erupted in complicit laughter, laughter that sounded more like echoes of obedience than genuine amusement. Miguel kept his gaze fixed on Augusto, his expression serene, almost defiant. His simple uniform, worn backpack, and slight build contrasted with the shine of the expensive suits around him. But within those dark eyes lay a spark that no one seemed to notice, except Augusto, who, for a moment, felt a strange, almost imperceptible unease, as if the boy weren't as fragile as he appeared. Even so, the tycoon persisted in his game of humiliation, crossing his arms and feigning indifference. "Show them all, kid, or shut your mouth forever." What no one expected was the reaction. Instead of lowering his head or retreating in the face of the laughter echoing through the room, Miguel took 2 firm steps toward the table, stopping before the contract. His voice, though young, was clear and confident. "If you allow me, I can try." Silence fell over the room like a suffocating weight. The laughter suddenly faded, replaced by expressions of astonishment. A poor boy, the son of the maid, had just accepted the challenge that renowned lawyers had failed to meet. And in that moment, everyone understood that what would follow would not be a spectacle of humiliation, but perhaps of revelation. Miguel's request echoed like a gust of icy wind inside the meeting room. For a few seconds, no one moved. The lawyers, who had previously been jostling for space to try to decipher the text, stood still, stunned by the boy's audacity. The directors, accustomed to seeing employees ignored or treated as if invisible, widened their eyes, unable to believe someone so young would dare stand before the most powerful man in the company. Even the foreign investors, who had until then maintained a cold and distant expression, exchanged discreet glances, intrigued by this unexpected turn of events. Augusto D'Angelo, for his part, leaned slowly in his chair, studying the boy through narrowed eyes. At first, his sarcastic smile still held, but there was a subtle tension in his jaw, betraying an unease he didn't want to admit. He was faced with a boldness he hadn't anticipated. And as he always did, he tried to regain control with irony. "Very well, young man. Let's see how far your courage will go. Bring the contract." The billionaire threw the document toward the boy, as if delivering a trap set to crush any shred of hope. Miguel took a deep breath, stretched out his small, firm hands, and held the sheets of paper in front of him. The silence was almost absolute, so dense that even the distant ticking of the wall clock seemed deafening. For the first time, Augusto's laughter found no echo. Everyone waited, suspended between doubt and curiosity. A 13-year-old boy was about to face a challenge that renowned professionals had failed to solve. What could possibly come out of his mouth? The tension was unbearable, and every second of waiting felt like a harbinger of something that would change the course of that room forever. Miguel held the contract tightly in his hands, though his fingers still trembled slightly under the weight of the responsibility that fell upon him. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not only clauses but the fate of everyone present. His dark eyes scanned the strange sequence of legal Latin, and for a moment the boy closed his lips, taking a deep breath. It was as if the silence gave him strength, as if, amid the luxury of that room where he should never have been, he had found his place. The contrast was stark. A humble boy, in a wrinkled school uniform, facing the words that doctors and lawyers had feared. Augusto D'Angelo leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a false expression of tranquility. Deep down, he believed the boy would stumble with just a few words and become the butt of everyone's laughter. His eyes gleamed with mischief, waiting for the moment when Miguel's boldness would be crushed by public shame. The directors leaned forward discreetly, as if to hear better, and the foreign investors, previously cold and impenetrable, began to observe with almost scientific curiosity. The atmosphere was charged, every gaze fixed on the boy as if the world had stopped to see what would happen next. Miguel squared his shoulders, placed the contract on the table, and, with a firm voice, began to pronounce the first words in Latin, then translated with frightening clarity. The sentences flowed as if he had been born for it. The lawyers' eyes widened. Some even straightened in their chairs in sheer astonishment. Augusto, however, maintained his frozen smile, though behind it, a tension began to build. With each translated line, the impossible became reality. The boy was mastering the text that no one had been able to decipher. And when the first revelations began to emerge, the entire room realized there was no turning back. Something much bigger was about to happen. The sound of Miguel Andrade's voice broke the heavy silence like lightning on a stormy night. He began to pronounce the Latin text with impressive clarity for one so young. The words flowed from the boy's mouth with a steady rhythm, as if each syllable had been secretly memorized. At the same time, he confidently translated into Portuguese, constructing sentences that immediately revealed a precise meaning. The directors looked at each other, mouths agape, and even the most experienced lawyers let out expressions of astonishment. It was like watching the impossible happen before their eyes. With each line, Miguel's confidence grew. His eyes ran over the archaic words as if they were old acquaintances, and his voice echoed through the room with unexpected authority. The laughter that had previously dominated the room had completely disappeared, replaced by an electric tension that gripped everyone in their seats. Augusto D'Angelo, who had initially watched with contempt, began to feel the smile slip from his lips. He didn't want to admit it, but something was deeply bothering him. This boy, who should have been merely a distraction from his cruelty, was earning the respect he himself had just ridiculed. When Miguel translated the first complete sentence, the silence turned to absolute shock. One of the lawyers, unable to contain himself, murmured softly, "He's right. These words, though spoken almost as a whisper, echoed louder than any of Augusto's laughter. The weight of the revelation fell upon everyone, and in that instant it became clear that the boy not only understood the text, but was about to reveal something that could change the course of that meeting forever. The question hanging in the air was inevitable. How far would Miguel's translation go? Eyes widened around the table as Miguel's first translated lines revealed their true meaning. It was impossible to ignore the precision of the words, the firmness of the tone, and the clarity of the explanation. The directors, previously restless, now stood motionless, as if afraid of missing a single syllable. Some leaned forward, others placed their hands on their chins, trying to comprehend how a 13-year-old boy could decipher what men trained in law and business administration had failed to grasp. The silence was no longer just respect, it was disbelief. One of the firm's most renowned lawyers, known for his arrogance and impeccable track record, couldn't resist whispering, "He's absolutely right." The comment echoed throughout the room, creating an even greater impact than the boy's own words. The foreign investors, who had remained cool until then, looked at each other in visible surprise. For them, this was more than unusual. It was almost a power shift. The hierarchy in the room, where the millionaire reigned supreme and the others bowed to his arrogance, began to crumble before the courage and knowledge of a boy who shouldn't even be there. Augusto D'Angelo gritted his teeth, trying to maintain a nonchalant expression, but his heavier breathing betrayed that something deep inside him had been struck. The easy laughter of a few minutes ago had given way to an uncomfortable rigidity. He still didn't react openly, but everyone who knew him knew. The mere thought of losing control of the situation was gnawing at him. Meanwhile, Miguel continued with the translation, revealing point by point what the clause concealed. The mood in the room was no longer one of doubt, but of anticipation, and each new sentence seemed to draw everyone closer to a revelation that promised to be devastating. Miguel took a deep breath and continued his translation firmly, each word revealing layers that had previously been hidden. The mysterious clause in Latin was no small detail. It concealed a condition that could change the entire contract. With a clear and mature intonation, he explained that the text stipulated that any ethical breach by the company would result in the immediate loss of investments and million-dollar fines, nearly impossible to pay. The lawyers turned pale, realizing they were standing before a disguised legal trap, ready to destroy Aurelius Corporation if anything was overlooked. The foreign investors reacted immediately, some raising their eyebrows, others exchanging serious glances. That clause, if left undisclosed, could have been signed blindly, putting the entire company at risk. Suddenly, the boy in the plain school uniform had become the only voice capable of saving or condemning an empire. The directors, who had previously laughed, now shifted uneasily in their chairs, as if complicit in a crime about to be revealed. Miguel's every word was like a hammer hitting the table, imposing a truth no one could deny. Augusto D'Angelo, behind his iron facade, was beginning to lose control. The arrogant smile had completely disappeared, replaced by a rigid, somber expression. His eyes fixed on the boy with a mixture of anger and disbelief, as if he couldn't believe the situation had escaped his control. Miguel, however, didn't back down. On the contrary, his stance seemed to grow even stronger as he progressed through the translation. And when he concluded the last line of that secret clause, the entire room fell into a deathly silence, with a single certainty hanging in the air: nothing would be the same after that. Augusto D'Angelo slowly leaned back in his chair, but there was no trace of the confident smile he had displayed minutes before. His fingers drummed on the oak table with increasing force, betraying the irritation he was trying to hide. The billionaire, accustomed to controlling every look, every word, and every reaction in his meetings, now found himself faced with a reality he could not control. A 13-year-old boy, the son of his maid, had exposed a trap that not even his most renowned lawyers had managed to detect. For Augusto, this was more than an embarrassment. It was a direct affront to his pride. The directors, who had always bowed in his presence, now kept their eyes fixed on Miguel. There was no more laughter, only silent admiration for what they had witnessed. Some lawyers mumbled among themselves, trying to justify their failure, but their voices sounded weak, insignificant compared to the boy's clarity. The room, previously dominated by Augusto's arrogance, now breathed a heavy tension, as if everyone awaited the reaction of the man who never admitted losing. With each second of silence, it became more evident that the magnate's authority had been shaken in front of everyone. Augusto squeezed the gold pen between his fingers until it was almost crushed, and for a moment he seemed ready to explode. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now shone with a mixture of fury and disbelief. He wanted to laugh, scream, or perhaps forcefully expel the boy, but he knew any hasty reaction would only confirm his defeat. He was trapped in his own pride. Meanwhile, Miguel remained silent, standing firmly before the table, as if waiting for something more. And this silence only reinforced the question everyone dreaded. What would happen when the magnate finally reacted? The meeting room was plunged into a stifling silence. The sound of the air conditioning and the ticking of the wall clock seemed to echo louder than ever, as if time itself had stopped to watch what had just happened. The directors remained motionless, some with their hands clasped on the table, others staring at Miguel, as if trying to understand how such a young boy had been able to dominate the situation so naturally. No one dared speak. It was as if any word could shatter the delicate balance of power that had just been reversed before everyone's eyes. The embarrassed lawyers lowered their eyes to their papers, avoiding the boy who had accomplished in minutes what they had been unable to achieve in hours of study and experience. The foreign investors, previously indifferent, now wore expressions of veiled respect, recognizing the skill none of them had expected to witness in this place. Even the security guards, positioned discreetly on the sides of the room, exchanged puzzled glances. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a testament to the unexpected greatness they had all just witnessed. At the center of it all, Miguel Andrade stood motionless, holding the contract as if it were an invisible sword. His calm breathing contrasted with the tense gazes around him. He didn't need to say anything. His posture spoke volumes. That boy, previously invisible, had become the absolute protagonist of the moment. And the longer the silence stretched, the clearer it became that everyone was waiting for the same thing: Augusto D'Angelo's next move. The billionaire, wounded in his pride, was about to break the silence in a way that could turn the meeting into an open confrontation. Miguel took a deep breath, still holding the contract, and looked up directly at Augusto D'Angelo. There was no fear in his expression, only a surprising calm for someone his age. The entire room seemed to lean in to hear what he would say, as if each word could determine the course of events. The boy's voice came out firm, clear, and incisive. "You laughed at me, but the truth doesn't belong to those with money. The truth has no owner." The impact of the statement was immediate. Directors looked at each other in silence. Lawyers held their breath, and even the investors, so accustomed to the power game, seemed to tremble at the boy's audacity. Augusto shifted in his seat, his face hardening by the second. He, who had always used words to crush others, was now struck by simple yet devastating phrases coming from the mouth of someone he had never considered worthy of being in his presence. The silence following Miguel's declaration was more deafening than any shout. It was as if everyone there understood that this boy had just done what no one had ever dared. Challenged the billionaire in front of everyone, without trembling, without backing down, without bowing. Miguel, still standing, held his gaze steady, and something beyond courage emerged in his face. There was dignity, there was truth, there was strength. It was impossible not to feel the weight of his words. The boy had exposed, before everyone, not only the hidden claws, but also Augusto D'Angelo's empty arrogance. And in that moment, the meeting ceased to be about contracts and business. It became a battle between power and truth. Tension built like a storm about to explode, and everyone waited to see if Augusto would react with fury or yield to the undeniable weight of reality. Augusto D'Angelo's face resembled a stone mask about to crack. His eyes sparkled with suppressed fury, while the muscles in his jaw twitched, betraying the effort to keep from exploding in front of everyone. The directors, who for years had grown accustomed to seeing him as the unshakable figure of power, now witnessed something unprecedented. The fragility of a man who had always believed himself untouchable. Every second of silence was like an involuntary confession of defeat, and this corroded Augusto more than any words he could have heard. The foreign investors began to murmur among themselves in their own languages, and the tension spread like wildfire. Some directors nervously arranged their papers. Others simply watched, with a mixture of fear and admiration for the boy who had dared to break the invisible hierarchy of that room. Augusto tried to regain control, clearing his throat and straightening his impeccable suit, but his gestures sounded empty and forced. The billionaire, who always dictated the rules, was now a cornered man facing a boy who had no fortune but something much greater, the truth. In that instant, it became clear to everyone that Augusto's indestructible image was shattered. The man who laughed, the man who ridiculed, had lost control of his own narrative. He still searched for words to defend himself, but none came. Meanwhile, Miguel stood firm, holding his gaze fearlessly, as if carrying the dignity of so many who had been silenced before him. The silence that hung was no longer one of tension, but of expectation. Everyone awaited the outcome. Augusto D'Angelo's empire of arrogance was crumbling before their eyes, and the only thing left to know was how it would fall. The prolonged silence seemed to compress the air inside the meeting room, until Miguel Andrade, still holding the contract, took a deep breath and gently placed the sheets on the table. The gesture, simple and calm, was more powerful than any speech. He needed neither applause nor recognition. His presence had already completely transformed the room. With his backpack still on his back and his uniform wrinkled, he slowly turned to leave, demonstrating that he sought nothing but the truth. His dignity was his armor, and that was worth more than all the wealth accumulated around him. The directors watched him, some visibly moved, others still trying to comprehend how the years-long hierarchy had been dismantled in a few minutes by a boy no one considered important. The lawyers kept their heads down, aware of their humiliation, while the foreign investors, now impressed, exchanged discreet comments about the unexpected integrity they had witnessed. And in the center of the table, the once imposing Augusto D'Angelo remained motionless, a prisoner of his own silence. The mask of arrogance he had always worn had fallen before everyone, and the memory of it could never be erased. When Miguel reached the door, he paused for a moment and glanced over his shoulder. His eyes met Augusto's again, and in that brief moment, there was neither hatred nor fear, only firmness. Without another word, he opened the door and left the room. The room remained in absolute silence, unable to break the weight of the moment. It was as if everyone had witnessed something historic, a shock no one would ever forget. And so, the invisible boy, the maid's son, walked out, leaving behind not just a translated contract, but an empire marked by the truth that silenced the entire room. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Like and share this video so more people can be moved and reflect on these messages. Together, we will share stories that inspire, transform, and prove that hope can come through anyone, and teach us that we should never underestimate anyone. Thank you for your support.